The morning sun was just starting to peek over the mountains when Lisa walked out of her small house. She lived alone in the quiet desert of New Mexico, about 20 miles from the nearest town. Her house was simple, just adobe walls and a red tile roof, but it was home. She had moved here 3 years ago after her husband passed away. Looking for peace and a fresh start, Lisa worked as a nurse at the local clinic, but today was her day off. She needed firewood for the cold nights that were coming. Winter in the desert gets surprisingly chilly, and her old wood stove was the only way to keep warm. She grabbed her canvas bag and headed toward the rocky area behind her property where dead branches were easy to find. The desert was beautiful in the early morning. The air was crisp and clean, and the only sounds were her footsteps and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. She had grown to love this quiet life, so different from the busy city where she used to live. Out here she could think clearly and find the peace that had been missing since her husband died. As she walked along the dry creek bed, something caught her eye. At first, she thought it might be a pile of old clothes someone had thrown away. But as she got closer, her heart nearly stopped. It was a person, a young boy lying motionless among the rocks. Lisa dropped her bag and ran toward him. Her nursing training kicked in immediately. The boy looked to be about 16 years old, with long black hair and bronze skin. He was wearing clothes she had never seen before, leather pants and a shirt with beautiful beadwork. Around his neck was a necklace made of turquoise stones that caught the morning light. The boy was unconscious, but she could see he was breathing. His left leg was bent at an odd angle, clearly broken. There were cuts on his arms and face, and his clothes were torn. Looking up at the rocky cliff above, she realized what had happened. He must have fallen at least 30 feet. As she knelt beside him to check his injuries, the boy's eyes suddenly opened. They were dark brown and filled with fear. He tried to push himself away from her, speaking rapidly in a language she didn't understand. His movements were weak, but she could see the panic in his face. "It's okay," she said softly, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "I'm here to help you. You're hurt." The boy didn't seem to understand her words, but her gentle tone seemed to calm him slightly. He stopped trying to crawl away, though his eyes never left her face. She could see he was in terrible pain, especially when he tried to move his broken leg. Lisa knew she had to act fast. The boy needed medical attention, but they were miles from the nearest hospital. She had some medical supplies at her house, and with her nursing experience, she could at least stabilize him until she could get help. She pointed to herself and said slowly, "Lisa." Then she pointed to him with a questioning look. He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered something that sounded like Atong. She wasn't sure if that was his name or something else, but she nodded and smiled. "Atong," she repeated, and she saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes that she had tried to say it correctly. The next challenge was getting him to her house. He was too injured to walk, and she wasn't strong enough to carry him. She tried to explain through gestures that she lived nearby and could help him there. At first, he shook his head frantically, clearly afraid to go anywhere with this stranger. Lisa pulled out her phone to call 911, but there was no signal. This far out in the desert, cell service was spotty at best. She showed the phone to Etong and shrugged, hoping he would understand that she couldn't call for outside help. They were on their own. She went back to her house and returned with an old wooden board and some rope. Very carefully, she explained through hand gestures what she wanted to do: use the board as a stretcher to move him safely. Etong watched her every move, his breathing shallow and quick from pain and fear. It took almost an hour to move him the quarter-mile to her house. She had to stop frequently when his pain became too much. During these breaks, she tried to keep him calm by talking softly, even though he couldn't understand her words. Sometimes she hummed quietly, and she noticed this seemed to soothe him. When they finally reached her house, she helped him onto her couch, the most comfortable place she could think of. Etong looked around her home with wide eyes, taking in the furniture, the photographs on the walls, and the strange objects he had never seen before. Everything must have seemed foreign to him. Lisa went to get her medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, and everything else she kept for emergencies. When she returned, Etong was trying to sit up, looking toward the door as if planning to leave. She gently pushed him back down and showed him his injured leg, shaking her head. "You can't walk on this," she said, pointing to the break. "It needs to be fixed first." Even though he couldn't understand her words, her meaning was clear. He reluctantly lay back down, but she could see the conflict in his face. He wanted to leave, probably to return to his family, but his body couldn't manage it. As she began to clean his wounds, Etong tensed up, expecting pain. But Lisa worked with the gentle skill of someone who had cared for patients for 15 years. She moved slowly and carefully, always warning him before she touched a new area. Gradually, he began to relax under her care. The cuts weren't as bad as they had looked at first. Mostly scrapes from the rocks during his fall, but his leg was definitely broken and would need proper setting. She had done this before in emergency situations, but never without proper equipment or pain medication that would actually work for something this serious. She showed him 2 pills and a glass of water. Pantomiming taking medicine, he looked suspicious at first, but when she pretended to take one herself, he seemed to understand they were meant to help with pain. He swallowed them with difficulty, grimacing at the taste. While they waited for the medication to take effect, Lisa tried to learn more about what had happened. Through simple drawings on paper, Etong showed her that he had been hunting in the mountains when he slipped and fell. He drew pictures of animals and mountains, then showed himself falling from a high place. As the afternoon wore on, she could see him becoming drowsy from the pain medication. But even as he fought sleep, his eyes kept moving to the windows, looking toward the mountains in the distance. She realized he wasn't just worried about his injuries, he was worried about his family. They were probably looking for him right now, wondering where he had gone. Lisa made him some simple food, bread, and soup, which he ate carefully, as if he wasn't sure it was safe. She ate some of the same food first to show him it was okay. This small gesture seemed to mean a lot to him, and for the first time since she found him, he almost smiled. As evening approached, she could see his anxiety growing. He kept pointing toward the mountains and saying words in his language that sounded urgent. She had the feeling he was trying to warn her about something, but she couldn't understand what. That night, she gave him her bed and slept on the couch, wanting to be nearby in case his condition worsened. But sleep didn't come easily. She kept thinking about this mysterious boy who had literally fallen into her life. Where did he come from? Who was his family? And why did she have the strange feeling that finding him was going to change everything? Lisa woke up before dawn to the sound of movement in her bedroom. She quickly got up from the couch and found Etong trying to stand on his injured leg. His face was twisted in pain, but he was determined to leave. When he saw her, he pointed toward the mountains and spoke urgently in his language, then tried to take another step. No, she said gently, helping him sit back down on the bed. Your leg isn't ready yet. You'll make it worse. Even though he couldn't understand her words, he could see the concern in her face. He looked frustrated and kept glancing toward the window where the first light of morning was starting to show. Lisa realized he was desperate to get home to his family, but she also knew that walking on that broken leg could cripple him for life. She brought him breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. He looked at the coffee suspiciously at first, but when she drank some and showed that it was good, he tried it too. His reaction was immediate. He made a face and pushed the cup away, clearly not liking the bitter taste. Lisa couldn't help but laugh, and for the first time, she saw him smile just a little. After breakfast, she knew she had to properly set his broken leg. She had put it off the day before because she didn't have the right supplies, but waiting any longer would be dangerous. She gathered everything she could find: wooden boards for splints, strips of cloth for wrapping, and more pain medicine. When Etong saw what she was planning to do, he became very nervous. He had probably never seen modern medical treatment before. Lisa sat beside him and showed him each item, demonstrating on her own arm how she would wrap the bandages. She pointed to his leg, then to the wooden splints, trying to explain that this would help his bone heal straight. The process was difficult for both of them. Even with pain medicine, setting the bone caused Etong tremendous pain. Lisa had to stop several times when she saw tears in his eyes. She felt terrible for hurting him, but she knew it had to be done properly. During the worst moments, Etong would grab her hand and squeeze it tightly, and she would squeeze back, letting him know she was there with him when it was finally over. Etong was exhausted and sweating from the pain. But Lisa was satisfied with her work. The bone was properly aligned and the splint was secure. She showed him how the wooden boards would keep his leg straight while it healed. Using simple gestures and drawings, over the next few hours, something interesting began to happen. With his leg properly cared for and the immediate pain reduced, Etong started to pay attention to his surroundings. He watched everything Lisa did with curious eyes, how she cooked food on the stove, how she turned on lights with switches, how water came out of the faucet when she turned a handle. Lisa noticed his curiosity and started showing him things around her house. She demonstrated how the light switch worked, turning it on and off several times. Etong's eyes widened with amazement. He had probably never seen electric lights before. She let him try it himself, and he seemed fascinated by the power to control. Light with just a touch. She showed him photographs on her walls, pictures of her late husband, her family, and places she had traveled. When she pointed to a photo of her husband working with Native American children at a reservation in Arizona, Etong studied it carefully. He seemed to recognize something familiar in the picture, and his whole demeanor toward Lisa changed. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something that looked like understanding. Communication slowly became easier as the day went on. Lisa would point to objects and say their English names: water, bread, chair. Etong would listen carefully and try to repeat the words, though they came out quite differently in his pronunciation. Then he would point to the same objects and say what they were called in his language. Lisa tried her best to repeat these words back to him, and he would patiently correct her pronunciation. One of the breakthrough moments came when Lisa was changing the bandage on a cut on his arm. Etong watched intently as she cleaned the wound and applied fresh gauze. He pointed to her hands and said something in his language, then made gestures like he was treating a wound. Lisa realized he was telling her that someone in his tribe, maybe his grandmother or mother, also knew how to heal people. This gave Lisa an idea. She brought out all her medical supplies and laid them on the table. One by one, she showed Etong what each item was for. The antiseptic for cleaning cuts, the bandages for covering wounds, the pills for pain. Etong examined everything with the careful attention of someone who understood the importance of healing. When she showed him how to take someone's pulse by feeling their wrist, Etong tried it on her. His face lit up with wonder when he felt her heartbeat. Then he took her hand and placed it on his own wrist, so she could feel his pulse too. It was a simple moment, but it felt like they had crossed some important barrier between them. As the afternoon wore on, Lisa noticed that Etong kept looking toward the mountains with increasing worry. She tried to ask him through gestures about his family, how many people, where they lived, if they would be looking for him. He drew pictures in the dirt outside her house, showing what looked like many people on horses, and pointed repeatedly toward the distant peaks. The way he drew the pictures made Lisa slightly nervous. There seemed to be a lot of people in his family or tribe, and they were clearly the type who traveled on horseback. She wondered what they would think when they discovered their young man was missing. Would they blame her for his disappearance? That evening, as they shared another simple meal, Etong became increasingly restless. He kept standing up and walking to the window, despite the pain it caused him. He would point to the mountains and speak urgently in his language, and Lisa could hear what sounded like worry or even fear in his voice. She tried to comfort him by showing him that his leg was healing well. The swelling had gone down, and there was no sign of infection in any of his cuts. But her reassurances didn't seem to help his anxiety about his family before going to bed. Etong did something that surprised Lisa. He took off the turquoise necklace he wore and held it out to her. When she shook her head, not wanting to take something that was obviously important to him, he gently took her hand and placed the necklace in her palm. Then he pointed to himself, then to her, and spoke what sounded like words of gratitude. Lisa was touched by the gesture, but she insisted he keep the necklace. She could tell it meant something special to him. Maybe it was a gift from his family or had religious significance. Instead, she found a small silver cross that her husband had given her years ago and offered it to Edong in return. He accepted it solemnly and immediately put it around his neck next to his turquoise stones. That night, as Lisa lay on the couch listening to Etong's quiet breathing from the bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The way he looked toward the mountains, the urgency in his gestures when he tried to communicate about his family, it all suggested that his people were actively searching for him. She found herself wondering what kind of people would come looking. For him, were they peaceful? Would they understand that she had only been trying to help? Or would they see her as someone who had taken their family member and demand answers she couldn't give? As she finally drifted off to sleep, Lisa had no idea that tomorrow would bring answers to all her questions and change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The second morning started differently than Lisa expected. When she woke up, she found Etong sitting by the window, fully dressed and alert. He wasn't trying to leave this time, but there was something new in his expression, a mixture of acceptance and determination that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," she said softly, and to her surprise he responded, "Good morning," he said slowly, the words careful but clear. He had been practicing. Lisa felt a warm rush of happiness. It was such a simple thing, but hearing him speak English, words felt like a huge step forward. She smiled widely and clapped her hands together, which made Etong smile too, a real, genuine smile this time. During breakfast, their communication took another leap forward. Etong pointed to the eggs on his plate and said eggs in English, then said what sounded like beta in his own language. Lisa repeated beta back to him and he nodded approvingly. They spent the meal going back and forth like this, with Etong teaching her Apache words and trying to learn more English ones. What amazed Lisa most was how quickly he picked things up. By mid-morning, he could say water, food, good, and thank you quite clearly. When she brought him his medicine, he said, "Thank you," without being prompted, and Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. This wasn't just learning words, he was truly communicating with her. But the real breakthrough came when Lisa was cleaning up after breakfast. She accidentally knocked over a glass and it shattered on the kitchen floor. As she bent down to pick up the pieces, she cut her finger on a sharp edge. "Oh," she exclaimed, holding up her bleeding finger. Etong immediately stood up, forgetting about his injured leg and his concern for her. He limped over quickly, took her hand gently, and examined the cut. Then he led her to the couch and gestured for her to sit down. Lisa watched in amazement as Etong went to her medical supplies and began gathering exactly what he needed: antiseptic, gauze, and tape. He had been watching her so carefully over the past 2 days that he knew exactly how to treat a wound. His movements were confident and sure, just like hers had been when she treated him. As he cleaned and bandaged her finger, he spoke softly in Apache, and even though she couldn't understand the words, his tone was soothing and caring, the same tone she had used with him. When he finished, he held up her bandaged finger and said, "Good, better now." Lisa felt tears come to her eyes. This young man who had been so afraid of her just 2 days ago was now taking care of her with the same gentleness she had shown him. It was one of the most touching moments of her life. After that, something shifted between them. The invisible wall of fear and mistrust finally came down completely. Etong began moving around the house more freely, helping with small tasks despite his injured leg. He couldn't do much, but he insisted on helping her fold laundry and organize her medical supplies. During one of these quiet moments, Etong picked up a photograph from Lisa's table, the one of her husband working with Native American children. He studied it for a long time, then pointed to her husband and said something in Apache. Then he pointed to himself and made a gesture that seemed to indicate respect or honor. Lisa realized he was trying to tell her that he recognized her husband as someone who had been good to his people. She nodded and said, yes, he was a good man. He loved helping children learn. Even though Etong didn't understand all her words, he seemed to understand her meaning. He placed the photograph back carefully and touched the small silver cross she had given him. which he still wore around his neck next to his turquoise stones. As the day continued, Lisa noticed that Atong was teaching her things too. When they went outside so he could get some fresh air, he showed her tracks in the dirt that she had never noticed before: rabbit prints, bird tracks, even the barely visible marks left by a coyote that had passed through her yard during the night. He also showed her which plants growing wild around her house could be used for medicine. He pointed to a small shrub she had always ignored and made gestures indicating it could help with stomach pain. Then he found another plant and showed her how its leaves could be crushed and used to help cuts heal faster. Lisa was fascinated. She had lived here for 3 years and never realized she was surrounded by natural remedies. Atong's knowledge of the desert and its secrets was incredible. Here was someone who could survive and thrive in this harsh environment using only what nature provided. But as the afternoon wore on, Lisa noticed Atong becoming increasingly anxious again. He kept scanning the horizon, and every time he heard a sound, a bird call, the wind through the rocks, even a distant car on the highway, he would freeze and listen intently. Finally, Lisa decided to address what was clearly bothering him. She sat beside him and pointed toward the mountains, then made a questioning gesture. Atong looked at her for a long moment, then began to draw in the dirt with a stick. He drew what looked like a map, showing mountains, valleys, and what appeared to be a camp or village. Then he drew many figures: men, women, and children. He pointed to one small figure and then to himself, indicating this was his place among his people. Next, he drew figures on horseback, moving in different directions from the camp. He made gestures that clearly indicated searching, looking, hunting. His family was looking for him, and they had been looking since the day he disappeared. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't really thought about this before, but of course his family would be worried sick. A teenage boy doesn't just disappear without causing panic among his loved ones. And if they were actively searching for him, it was only a matter of time before they found him here. Atong seemed to read her thoughts. He pointed to her, then to himself, then made protective gestures with his hands. He was trying to tell her that he would protect her, that he would make sure his family understood she had helped him, not hurt him. But then he made other gestures that worried Lisa more. He showed what looked like many warriors, and his expression became very serious. He pointed toward the mountains again and held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the sun. Lisa's heart sank as she understood his people would be here in 2 days. Maybe less. The rest of the day passed with a strange mixture of normalcy and tension. They continued their language lessons, with Atong learning to say help, friend, and safe. But underneath their conversations was the knowledge that their peaceful time together was coming to an end. That evening, as they shared what would probably be their last quiet dinner together, Atong did something that surprised Lisa. He began to sing. It was a soft, haunting melody in his own language. And even though she couldn't understand the words, she could feel the emotion in it: gratitude, sadness, and something that sounded like a prayer. When he finished, there were tears in both their eyes. Lisa realized that this young man had touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. In just 2 days, he had become like family to her. The thought of him leaving made her sad, but the thought of what might happen when his family arrived made her truly afraid. As they prepared for bed, Atong took her hand and spoke several sentences in Apache, his voice serious and earnest. Then he tried to translate some of it into English. Double quotes. You. Good woman, he said carefully. You. Dong Atong. No, forget. Family, they understand. They. Good people too. Lisa squeezed his hand and hoped with all her heart that he was right. Tomorrow she would find out if kindness and compassion were truly universal languages that could bridge any gap between different worlds. Lisa woke up on the 3rd morning to complete silence. The desert was too quiet. Even the usual bird songs were missing. She looked out her window and saw Atong sitting on her front porch, staring toward the mountains with intense focus. His whole body was tense, like an animal sensing danger. When she joined him outside with coffee, he immediately grabbed her arm and pointed to the distant hills. At first, Lisa couldn't see anything unusual, but then she noticed it: a small cloud of dust rising from behind the rocks, moving steadily toward them. They come, Etong said quietly in English, his voice mixed with relief and worry. Lisa felt her stomach drop. This was the moment they had both been dreading and expecting. After 3 days of peaceful coexistence, the outside world was about to crash into their small bubble of friendship. Over the next hour, they watched the dust cloud grow larger. Lisa tried to stay calm, but her hands were shaking as she made breakfast. She had heard stories about conflicts between settlers and native tribes in the old days. Even though this was modern times, she had no idea what to expect. Etong noticed her nervousness and took her hands in his. "Lisa, good woman," he said slowly, using the English words he had learned. "Etong tell family, they understand." But Lisa could see that even Etong was nervous. He kept adjusting his turquoise necklace and touching the silver cross she had given him. He was preparing for something important, maybe even dangerous. Around noon, the first riders appeared on the ridge above Lisa's house. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw them. There were at least 15 Apache warriors on horseback, and they looked nothing like the friendly people she had imagined. These men looked fierce and angry. With paint on their faces and traditional weapons at their sides, the lead rider was an older man with long, gray hair braided with feathers. Even from a distance, Lisa could see the authority in the way he sat, his horse, and the way the other warriors positioned themselves around him. This was clearly their leader, and he looked like someone you didn't want to cross. Etong stood up from the porch, supporting himself with the walking stick Lisa had made for him. He called out in Apache, his voice carrying across the desert. The response from the riders was immediate and intense. Several of them shouted back, and Lisa could hear anger in their voices even though she couldn't understand the words. The warriors rode down from the ridge in a formation that looked like a military attack. They surrounded Lisa's house completely, cutting off any chance of escape. The sound of their horses' hooves on the hard ground was like thunder and dust-filled the air. Lisa's mouth went dry with fear. She had never seen anything so intimidating in her life. These weren't just concerned family members, they looked like a war party. Several of the younger warriors had their hands on their weapons, and their eyes were cold and hostile as they stared at her. The leader dismounted and walked toward them with slow, deliberate steps. He was tall and imposing, with scars on his arms that spoke of a lifetime of battles. When he looked at Lisa, she felt like he could see right through her soul. His eyes were hard as stone, and she couldn't read any mercy in them. Etong hobbled forward to meet him, speaking rapidly in Apache. But instead of the warm reunion Lisa had expected, the conversation quickly became heated. The older man, who Lisa realized must be Etong's grandfather or uncle, was clearly angry. He gestured toward Etong's injured leg and torn clothes, then pointed accusingly at Lisa. Other warriors joined the conversation, their voices rising. Lisa caught glimpses of their expressions and felt her fear growing. They were looking at her like she was an enemy, someone who had harmed their family member. Several of them dismounted and moved closer, forming a semicircle around her. Lisa wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was completely surrounded by angry warriors who thought she had hurt the boy they had come to rescue. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she realized that her life might actually be in danger. Etong's voice became more urgent as he tried to explain what had really happened. He pointed to his bandaged leg, then to Lisa, then back to the cliff where he had fallen. But the warriors weren't listening. They had found their missing family member injured and in the care of a white woman, and they had drawn their own conclusions. The leader, who Lisa now understood was Etong's grandfather, stepped closer to her. When he spoke, his voice was deep and threatening, even though she couldn't understand his words. The message was clear. He held her responsible for his grandson's condition. Lisa tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I helped him," she managed to say. "I found him hurt. I took care of him." The grandfather's eyes narrowed. He said something sharp in Apache, and two of the younger warriors moved to flank Lisa on the other side. She could smell the leather and sweat from their horses, could see the steel in their eyes. This was really happening. They were going to take her prisoner, or worse. But then Etong did something that changed everything. Despite his injured leg, he moved between Lisa and his grandfather, spreading his arms wide in a protective gesture. He spoke in Apache, but his tone was different now, not pleading, but commanding. He was standing up to his own grandfather. To protect her, the grandfather looked shocked. Clearly, this wasn't behavior he expected from his injured grandson. The other warriors murmured among themselves, and Lisa could sense confusion in their ranks. Why was Etong protecting the woman they thought had harmed him? Etong continued speaking, his voice growing stronger. He pulled up his shirt to show his grandfather the careful way Lisa had bandaged his ribs. He lifted his leg to display the professional splint she had made. He pointed to the clean cuts on his arms that were healing without infection. Then Etong did something that made Lisa's heart skip. He took off both necklaces, his turquoise stones and her silver cross, and held them up for everyone to see. He spoke in Apache, but Lisa caught one English word repeated several times. Friend. The grandfather examined the medical work on Etong's leg, his expression slowly changing from anger to puzzlement. He was clearly a man who understood injuries and healing, and he could see that this was skilled medical care, not the work of someone trying to cause harm. But the real turning point came when Etong limped over to Lisa's medical supplies, which were still laid out on her porch table. He picked up the antiseptic and bandages, then demonstrated on his own arm how Lisa had taught him to clean and dress wounds. He was showing his grandfather that Lisa hadn't just helped him. She had shared her knowledge with him. The grandfather watched this demonstration with growing interest. He said something to the other warriors, and several of them dismounted to get a closer look at Lisa's medical equipment. They had probably never seen modern first aid supplies before, and they were clearly impressed by their effectiveness. Slowly, the hostility in the air began to change. The warriors were still suspicious, but they were no longer treating Lisa like an enemy. The grandfather stepped closer to examine her bandage work on Etong's leg, and Lisa could see respect growing in his eyes as he recognized the skill involved, but the situation was still dangerous. These were proud, fierce people who had come expecting to rescue their family member from captivity. Even if they were beginning to understand that Lisa had helped rather than harmed Etong, they still hadn't decided what to do with her. The grandfather straightened up and looked directly into Lisa's eyes. When he spoke this time, his voice was different, still serious, but no longer threatening. Lisa didn't understand his words, but she could sense that something important was about to happen. Etong translated, his English slow but clear. Grandfather. Says you show honor, you heal family, now ... He must decide ... what this means. Lisa realized she was holding her breath. The next few minutes would determine whether she had gained the respect of these proud people, or whether helping Etong would end up being the last good deed of her life. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Lisa could hear her own heartbeat as the grandfather studied her face, searching for something that would help him make his decision. The other warriors waited, motionless, their eyes moving between their leader and the woman who had cared for their young family member. Finally, the grandfather spoke a single word in Apache. The effect was immediate. All the warriors relaxed their postures and stepped back slightly. Whatever he had said, it had changed the entire atmosphere. Etong's face broke into a huge smile. Grandfather says you have ... you say? Good spirit. Good heart, he translated, his English coming faster now with excitement, but the grandfather wasn't finished. He walked closer to Lisa, so close she could see the weathered lines around his eyes and the gray streaks in his long braided hair. When he reached into a leather pouch at his belt, Lisa's heart skipped again. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver bracelet set with turquoise stones that matched Etong's necklace. The bracelet was clearly very old and very precious, the kind of thing that gets passed down through generations. The grandfather held it up so all the warriors could see it, and Lisa heard several of them gasp in surprise. Etong's eyes grew wide. He said something urgently to his grandfather in Apache, but the older man shook his head firmly. Then he took Lisa's right hand in his weathered ones and slowly placed the bracelet around her wrist. The moment felt sacred somehow. The grandfather spoke in Apache, his voice formal and ceremonial. Atong struggled to translate, his English not quite good. Enough for what seemed to be important words. He says, "You are now family?" Atong finally managed. This bracelet ... it belonged to his mother. Only family can wear it. You saved me. Now you are ... sister to our people. Lisa felt tears streaming down her face. She had gone from fearing for her life to being adopted into this proud family in the space of minutes. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. Instead, she placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head to the grandfather, hoping he would understand her gratitude. The grandfather smiled for the first time since arriving, a real, warm smile that transformed his entire face. He said something else to the gathered warriors, and suddenly the mood shifted completely. Where there had been tension and suspicion, now there was celebration. The warriors began dismounting and moving around Lisa's property, but now they seemed curious rather than threatening. Several came to examine Etong's injuries more closely, nodding approvingly at Lisa's medical work. Others looked at her house and the strange objects inside with fascination rather than suspicion. One of the younger warriors, who looked like he might be Etong's brother, approached Lisa with a shy smile. He pointed to himself and said, "Nalnish." Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. "Lisa," she said, and he repeated it carefully. Soon, other warriors were introducing themselves too, though their names were difficult for Lisa to pronounce. But it didn't matter. The important thing was that they were trying to communicate with her, not threatening her. The grandfather gestured for Lisa to sit with him in the shade of her porch. Through Etong's translation, he began to tell her their story. They were from a small Apache community that lived in the traditional way in the mountains about 50 miles north. When Etong hadn't returned from his hunting trip 3 days ago, the entire community had been worried sick. They had searched everywhere, following his trail until it disappeared at the cliff where he had fallen. They had feared he was dead, lost in the deep canyons where his body might never be found. When they finally found tracks leading toward Lisa's house, they had prepared for the worst, thinking perhaps he had been captured or was being held against his will. "We thought maybe you were bad person," Etong explained, looking embarrassed. "People in town sometimes not nice to Apache. Grandfather thought maybe you hurt me, keep me prisoner." Lisa understood their reaction now. If she had found a seriously injured child from her community in a stranger's house, she probably would have assumed the worst too. The fact that they had come in force, prepared for trouble, made perfect sense from their perspective, but now, seeing the evidence of her care and hearing Etong's account of what had really happened, they understood the truth. Lisa wasn't a threat. She was a healer who had risked her own safety to help a stranger, the grandfather asked, through Etong, about Lisa's medical training. When she explained that she was a nurse and had learned her skills in school and hospitals, he nodded thoughtfully. He spoke to several of the other warriors, and Lisa caught the word that sounded like her name being repeated several times. "Grandfather wants to know if you would come visit our village sometime," Etong translated. "We have medicine woman, but she is very old. Maybe you could teach some people, share knowledge." Lisa was amazed. These people, who had been ready to capture or harm her just an hour ago, were now inviting her to be part of their community. She looked around at the faces watching her hopefully and felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced since her husband died. "I would be honored," she said, and Etong translated her words. The response was immediate, smiles and nods from all the warriors, and what sounded like approval from the grandfather. As the afternoon wore on, something wonderful happened. The warriors began sharing their own knowledge with Lisa. One showed her how to identify different types of tracks in much more detail than Etong had been able to. Another demonstrated how to make a fire using only materials found in the desert. A third taught her some basic Apache phrases beyond what she had learned from Etong. In return, Lisa showed them more of her medical supplies and techniques. She demonstrated how to check someone's temperature, how to listen to a heartbeat with her stethoscope, and how to properly clean and bandage different types of wounds. The warriors were fascinated by her knowledge and eager to learn, but the most touching moment came when one of the younger warriors, who looked like he was barely 20, rolled up his sleeve to show Lisa an infected cut on his arm. He had clearly been hiding it, probably not wanting to appear weak in front of the others. But now he trusted her enough to ask for help. Lisa cleaned and treated the infection while the others watched intently. As she worked, she explained what she was doing and why, with Atong translating. When she finished, the young warrior looked at his properly bandaged arm with amazement and spoke what were clearly words of gratitude. The grandfather watched this entire exchange with approval. When Lisa was done, he spoke to her directly, his voice warm and respectful. Atong translated. He says you truly have the spirit of a healer. You help anyone who needs it, even strangers. This is very important to our people. As the sun started to set, Lisa realized this magical day was coming to an end. The warriors would need to take Atong home, and she would return to her quiet life in the desert, but everything had changed now. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a new family that stretched far beyond her small house. The goodbye was emotional for everyone. Atong hugged Lisa tightly, tears in his eyes as he thanked her. Again and again in both English and Apache. He promised to visit her soon and to continue practicing the English words she had taught him. The grandfather took both of Lisa's hands in his and spoke solemnly in Apache. Atong translated. He says the door to our family is always open to you. When you are ready, come to the mountains. We will show you our home, and you can teach us more about healing. You are our sister now, and sisters are always welcome. As the warriors mounted their horses and prepared to leave, Lisa looked down at the silver and turquoise bracelet on her wrist. It caught the last rays of sunlight, sparkling like a promise of all the adventures and friendships that lay ahead. She had started this week as a lonely widow living in isolation. Now she was a member of an Apache family, with a new purpose and a community that valued her skills and appreciated her kindness. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful things in life come when you least expect them, falling from the sky like an injured boy who needs help, and transforming your entire world in just 3 days.